Hello, and welcome back to whatever I'll title this video. My name is Liam Brown. I know the news today can be a little bit upsetting, with news of war, poverty, corruption, and bloodshed in a civilization that's slowly killing itself and the rest of the planet. You know, news that makes you want to throw yourself and your TV into oncoming traffic, so don't worry. Today I won't be discussing any of those. Most of those. Two of those. No. Instead, I'll be discussing the very fun and not all controversial topic of we're talking about ethnic cleansing. Wow. Okay. Let's just dive right into it, I guess. I think we can all agree that ethnic cleansing and genocide are some of, if not the worst things that humanity has ever done. The mass relocation, deportation, or murder of an entire ethnic group, an entire group of people, wiping them from a region. Actions that we recognize as the worst of humanity, actions that we have sworn to prevent. Yet we don't seem to talk or even care about it, unless it's happened to white people, of course. No, today we're going to be talking about Uyghurs. Uyghurs? Uyghurs. A group that has been named one of the most oppressed ethnicities in the world is also trending 10 times less than the Kardashians in America. Now, I know you might be thinking, well, that's a given, and I'll give you that, as Americans love keeping posted on a boring rich family that should get a recycling wheel placed in them. But it is trending less than Sean Levy's night at the museum. What the fuck? I'm not even kidding. You can look it up. I wish I was. That's, well, upsetting, to say the least. But now, some of you might be wondering, Liam, who then are these Uyghurs you're talking about? Why are they so important? Well, I'm glad you asked, or else this video would have no other purpose besides just further deteriorating my mental health. Uyghurs and other Turkic Muslims are, well, an ethnic group comprised of mostly Sunni Muslims that reside in the Xinjiang province of Western China. Let's go to Ronan for the location of Xinjiang.
Two.
Thank you, Ronan. Let's go to my own creative idea that I definitely did not steal from a YouTuber whose first name is John, last name Green, the Thought Bubble. Uyghurs have resided in this arid, mostly uninhabitable area since the 3rd century CE. Before then, it was loosely controlled by the Han Dynasty, and the Silk Road went through the region, but that changed, and Uyghurs remain still there, not important. This area went back and forth between being influenced by the Tang Dynasty, you do not need to know who they are, the Mongolians, and the Arabs, the Turks, the latter causing the spread of Islam in the region, and a strange mix of Turkic and Mongolian being spoken by Uyghurs, depending on the location. The Uyghurs formed a kingdom or two before being conquered by the Mongols under the leadership of the man, the myth, the sexual predator himself, Genghis Khan, in the 13th century, and once again falling under the control of the Qing dynasty after a long conflict against those pesky tribes people in the 18th and 19th centuries, making Xinjiang its own province in 1884. Okay, well, I'm going to stop with that thought bubble because I can assume that's going to take future me days, and it'll be a pain in the ass to animate, and will probably push me close to the edge. Now, I apologize for my poor drawing skills. Someone has not yet taught me how to draw, you know who you are. Now, this is a very convenient place to stop because there's actual, footage and photos, which is really nice. During the Chinese Revolution and the following Civil War, it was seized by Qing forces again, only to follow the Communist Revolutionary forces, then back to Kuomintang forces. They're not important unless you're interested in Taiwan, in which case they are very important. Then just back and forth for a few years until falling under the control of the CCP, also known as the modern-day Chinese government, at the end of the Civil War. Xinjiang was kind of left alone for a while, setting up some nice plantations and becoming an autonomous region in 1955. Keep that in mind. There was cultural revolution stuff, ethnic tensions caused by the mass exodus of Kazakhs, caused by food shortages, caused by cultural revolution stuff. Then things kind of returned to normal for a while, though China was nowhere near great in this time period. You might be wondering how most, if not all of that, is at all relevant, and it's not. I just really like history. But I think it is important to keep in mind as we move forward the cultural and historical differences between Xinjiang and the rest of China, and the division of the two entities, mainly that it was declared an autonomous region. Like two divorced parents, but instead of fighting over the rights of the family car, they're in dispute over 26 million people. Right, so if you're still here, you have endurance that I lack, but I'd grab some ibuprofen if I were you, because this next part is like current events. If you weren't paying attention there, first of all, rude, but you should start now. In the 1990s, but with also some other instances in decades prior, Beijing started to pump Xinjiang full of Han Chinese civilians, like how San Francisco pumps rich people everywhere, except maybe more xenophobic, but it's kind of hard to say. They were encouraged to enter through economic incentives in a program known as the Big Development of the Northwest, which of course did not benefit Uyghurs in the region. Han is the ethnicity of most Eastern Chinese civilians, and it is in fact the largest ethnicity in the world, equaling about 1.5 billion people worldwide. I can't really make a joke about that besides the fact that China is fucking massive. Anyways, many claim that this mass migration was encouraged and organized by the Chinese government in order to dilute the minority population there and increase stability, which, I mean, come on, they wouldn't do that. It's unlike them. I do feel like I've seen this before. I don't know where, though. Strange. The Han population accounted for about 1/5 of the entire Xinjiang population by the end of the 20th century. These moves of modernization disproportionately benefited Han populations there more, even harming Uyghur populations in the process. Economic disparities grew too, including that good old discrimination. This caused a little bit of tension between Uyghurs and the Chinese government and the Han population living in the region. And by little tensions, I mean anti-Han and separatist movements in the region. Level tensions, causing some violence, including a particularly violent incident in 2009 in which a riot against encouraged migration plus economic discrimination left nearly 200 people dead, mostly Han, and 1,700 injured. There are also other things such as knife attacks and suicide bombers. Just like O.J. Simpson kind of found out, murder isn't great for your public image. Now, China was left with the obvious answer to this crisis. I'll give you time to think of what it was. That's right, authoritarian action, including shootings, arrests for a large range of crimes, suggesting anything dissent, long jail times, torture, the murder of activists, suppression of Uyghur culture, including Islam, harassment, Islamophobia, of course, and racism, the whole shebang. But wait, that's just the start. We'll get into the rest later. Just be patient. The Chinese government claimed that it was the natural extension to the war on terror after 9/11. Now, here in the US, we're pretty familiar with wars on terrors, but in this case, Xinjiang is like technically a part of China, and China can like easily fix these tensions without doing anything violent. That'd be like if the US, I don't know, like bombed a bunch of West Virginians for protesting low pay. Oh, shit, we did do that. Okay, bad example, but still. China claimed that multiple attacks in the eastern part of China were the fault of Uyghurs, specifically the East Turkestan Islamic Movement, the organization that China has blamed for many attacks and pins most of its actions towards. Which, by the way, the US has removed from the list of terrorist organizations for little to no proof of them actually existing for the last decade. China has pinned their extreme measures on ending extremism, but it just so happens that Xinjiang has some of the largest natural gas reserves in all the whole nation. Funny how things work out like that. These actions seemed less as an attempt to stop extremism and more of a way to mold Uyghurs into a more pro-China shape. Man, I feel like I've seen this before. But then things got worse. So very worse. In May of 2014, China launched the Strike Hard campaign against violent extremism, or however you say this. It was passed after some attacks in China that were allegedly done by Turkic Muslims. This information basically cannot be verified and can even be assumed to be at least somewhat made up because, China. This campaign explicitly targets any Turkic Muslim in that region, and I really mean any. This campaign greatly expanded the amount of actions deemed extremist, greatly expanded surveillance, and set up re-education camps. If you've ever heard anything about Uyghurs, likely you've heard that word being used. I will dive deeper in all three of these, but there's just so much to get into, and so ibuprofen will not be enough here. I'd recommend something a little stronger. I suggest hard liquor. One of the first steps in the campaign is heightened surveillance. Now, I know you might be surprised by this, since China is, of course, known for its great track record in the privacy of its civilians, but it is far worse here. China has set up a 10-household joint defense policy in which 10 families are grouped together and forced to monitor each other with collective punishment. Now, you might think that that's dumb, and of course it's dumb. It's also cruel. but probably you meant dumb as in why would they tell each other in a collective, if there are collective punishments. If they're the only ones monitoring each other, then why would they tell each other? Well, you see, they aren't, and you're dumb for thinking that. Chinese officials are circulated in and out of these houses for a week every month or two in the Becoming Family program, also known as Fanghiju. I definitely did not pronounce that right, so I apologize. In these programs, these officials have to look out for problems and suspicious activities such as cleanliness, alcoholism, and the extent of religious beliefs. Yikes. They also spread state propaganda such as the deals of the CCP and Xi Jinping, and also warn of pan-Islamism, pan-Kazakhism, and pan-Turkishism. Yikes. They also force the occupants to sing the national anthem, go to flag-raising events, and they also take photos and notes of everyday life. By the way, these photos are uploaded online. And this is barely even scraping the surface. There's so much that I left out. It's too many yikes. It's like having an Alexa, but whenever you ask it to play Coldplay, it would read you excerpts from the Little Red Book and scream Islamophobic remarks at you. At least the constant monitoring part would say about the same. At the same time, China is also running a program known as Physicals for All, which they collect DNA scans, collect iris scans, DNA samples, fingerprints, and blood types of all Xinjiang citizens between the ages of 12 and 65. You might be thinking, yeah, well, every country does that. What's the big deal? You see, they don't, though. They really don't. As Sophie Richardson put it, Xinjiang authorities should rename their physical exams projects privacy violations for all. Goddamn, Sophie, you killed them. In all seriousness, though, this data is collected without the consent or even knowledge in some instances of those being tested. They have little to no say on whether they can take the test and are often pressured to take the test, since if they do not, they would be considered to have thought problems. Listen, I know a thing or two about thought problems, and refusing to get every part of your body recorded is not one of them. What that really means, though, is political dissent, or question of political loyalty. By refusing this test, you're putting your loyalty to the state at question. So the obvious answer is to take the test or face other punishments. The biometrics of targeted personnel, or just people deemed to be a threat to stability, is collected along with everyone else in their family. Things such as mood and mindset are also recorded. At the same time, checkpoints are implemented where voices are recorded. There are checkpoints really just all over. Wi-Fi locations are recorded. Vehicles are constantly tracked. Even knives have QR codes on them with information of the buyer to link the knife back to the person who bought it. Though I do kind of like that idea. You know, after you get stabbed, you scan a little QR code. Possibilities kind of endless. That. Around the region, though, there are massive CCTV networks with things such as facial recognition, license plate recognition, and even night vision capabilities. All this data, along with data taken from people's phones, such as text messages and calls, is gathered up into one large database known as the Integrated Joint Operations Platform, or IJOP. This database flags individuals deemed potentially threatening, alerting them to authorities who deem whether they should be sent to re-education camps or punished otherwise. In 1 week of June of 2017, 24,412 individuals were flagged. 1 week, 15,683 of them were sent to camps. Things that people get flagged for span such a large spectrum, it's kind of hard to name even a small percentage of it. And people have been flagged for doing basically nothing, including one woman who was flagged for receiving 4 calls from out-of-state individuals. This surveillance effort extends outside of China's borders onto Uyghur phones outside of the nation through software embedded in apps that Turkic Muslims often use. If you ever want to experience The Truman Show, I can't really think of a better place to go, since it bears a lot of similarities. Except that one scene on the bridge, they'd both be sent to a labor camp. You see, because the range of crimes you can be sent to prison for is completely reasonable and logical. Here, let me just run through them real quick. Just got a quick list here. All right. Right, okay. Overseas travel, connections outside of China, traveling to 26 sensitive countries, applying for a passport, communicating with somebody out of China, accidentally clicking on an overseas website, moving around inside of China, going on an unofficial Hajj pilgrimage, religious activities including fasting, prayer, attendance to religious events, studying religion, having a religious household, not attending a flag raising ceremony. Okay, I think you get the idea. Sorry, let me just get this out of here. Okay, I think you get the idea. It's not great. In fact, I'd go as far as say as it is very bad. As you can tell, these crimes are mainly focused around religious practices, and man, I don't know. What group in Xinjiang is culturally religious, and a religion is literally in the name of it? Beats me. Journalists, doctors, entertainers, and activists are targeted for separatism due to the process. Due process is merely a suggestion there, one that is often ignored, politely declined, often providing no warrant, preventing the defendant from pleading not guilty, kicking out lawyers, and basically making the decision of the case before the trial. Let's run through a list of some of those imprisoned. Shen Dehui studied the Quran abroad, invited religious leaders over, and held religious meetings. Life in prison. Nebajan Goha Emet told people what was halal and haram. 10 years in prison. Nurlan Pioner educated about 70 people about religion. He was sentenced to 17 years in prison. I think you're getting the point that I'm trying to make. These actions specifically target an ethnic minority in this region, targeting their culture and religion. It is extremely difficult, nearly impossible, to avoid imprisonment. And as a result, it is estimated that between a few 100,000 to 1 million people have been through these prisons. This isn't an attempt to end extremism. This isn't a strategy to bring stability to a region, nor is it a strategy to bring peace. No, it's an attempt to tear apart an ethnic community that has existed there for multiple millennia, to erase culture, to suppress religion, to tear apart anything that resembled autonomy. It is nothing less than that. Most of those imprisoned were sent to re-education camps. China officials make it seem like these camps are a nice vacation somewhere in the Caribbean, and I mean, they're not entirely wrong. It's just that that place in the Caribbean happens to be Guantanamo Bay. 380 prison camps have been constructed as of 2020, with more in construction. Between 2016 and 2018, the amount of camps grew by 456%, and the size of them has also increased insanely. From here, I'm going to be serious because, well, this is extremely serious. There definitely wasn't a cut there. There have been multiple reports of torture, such as hanging from walls, sleep deprivation, beatings, and being strapped to a tiger chair during interrogation. Not that type of tiger chair. Yeah, that one. Living conditions are appalling, with overcrowding, including multiple inmates assigned to a single bed, dozens of individuals put into a small room where they're expected to defecate and sleep. They're given inadequate food. I think that's kind of a given, but their access to medical care was at times limited. Prisons were constantly monitored by officials, while forced examinations, strips, and beatings were unfortunately very common. And then there was the sexual violence at these camps. This part was very difficult to research. It was just very horrific, so just bear with me. One woman recounted she was raped 3 times during a 9-month stay at the camp, and at least one woman was selected and raped every night from her room. Many other reports line up with this one too. Some reports even include things that are borderline torture, or they were torture. Some inmates are threatened with rape if they do not comply with guards. There are other reports of forms of sexual assault too. I'm only calling them reports because that's what they technically are, not because I don't believe them or anything stupid like that. Because I do, of course, believe them. Luckily, that is the end of women's rights violations in this region. Okay, let's move on to women's reproductive rights violations by the Chinese government. In order to decrease the excess growth of Uyghurs in the area, they are enacting harsh punishments, including training and education, internment camps, on those who do not follow birth control rules tied with China's family planning policies. In fact, a large percentage of those arrested and sent to these camps, at times up to 25% of inmates, are sent because of having too many children. They claim that having too many kids encourages religious extremism and splitism. My mom had 6 kids, and to my knowledge, has not joined any terrorist organization yet. It's bullshit. It's dumb. It's horrible. It's a violation of human rights and the rights of millions of women. Luckily, that's it. Hello? Right, okay, sorry. Forgot to mention, forced sterilization. Women in Xinjiang are pressured and at times forced to receive IUDs by the government, ones that can only be removed by government-run procedures, and receive mandatory pregnancy tests and check-ins, especially on those deemed people of interest. In some villages, over 70% of married women who were childbearing had IUDs. 70% in Xinjiang. I'm going to paint you a little bit of a picture here. Xinjiang has like 28 million people living in it, about 1.84% of China's total population. In 2014, 2.5% of the net add IUDs in China were in Xinjiang. It's a bit high, but all things considered, it's like kind of reasonable. But that was before the Strike Hard campaign, because in 2018, 80% of the net IUDs in China were in Xinjiang. 80%. Even though that region takes up 1.84% of the total population. It's very important to keep in mind that many of these were pressured or oftentimes forced onto these women. Contrary to other parts in the world, this data suggests far less reproductive rights for women. Forced sterilization has also been reported in these camps of, probably no surprise there. It is a drive, there's a drive for mass sterilization in rural Uyghur regions. I hope I don't have to stress this at all to you guys, that preventing access or forcing birth control or sterilization onto women is very, 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 very bad. I mean, I know all of you know that. I mean, our Supreme Court justices don't, but I hope that you guys do. It wouldn't be a system of cruel imprisonment and ethnic cleansing without forced labor, though. In China's idle labor transfer programs, where prisoners are sent to factories that are sometimes connected to the camps, they worked for little to no pay. If they were lucky enough to even get paid, it was often withheld from them until they were freed, which could be years later, if they were ever freed. They claim that this is in order to try to end poverty. But the key part of the whole ending poverty thing is that you actually pay your workers. Maybe they just didn't pick that up in the memo. The French kind of tried something like this. It didn't end up too well for them, did it? And that's like completely a lie. I wrote this part at like 1 in the morning, couldn't bother researching an entire other labor and economic system, so you're just gonna have to make do with a shitty French Revolution joke. Religion is suppressed in and out of these camps. Religious acts are prohibited in the prisons, and inmates are often punished for practicing them. When being freed from these camps, they had to sign a form promising they would not practice their religion once freed, or else, well, they wouldn't be. As you may have been able to figure out, conditions in these camps are truly appalling. And keeping in mind the range of crimes that can wind you up in one of these camps, most of these people seeing these horrendous conditions did absolutely nothing wrong. In fact, one county in Xinjiang, Konesheher, I know I butchered that. I couldn't pronounce spaghetti until I was like in 2nd grade, so just bear with me. That province has the highest prison rate in the world, and they have Oklahoma to compete with. Many were taken from their families without being aware, separating families and communities in mere minutes. In total, there have been 177 confirmed deaths in these camps that we know of. Keyword, that we know of. Then there is cultural erasure. When I say I'm not going to make any jokes here, I really mean it. One, because it's a fucking cultural erasure, and two, because I wrote this part 11:20 on a Wednesday night and didn't trust myself. Turkic and Kazakh, those two languages, are banned in schools along with teaching religion, and it is not allowed. That writing is not allowed on signs or writings, and using it is extremely discouraged. In fact, political officials who use both Chinese and Turkic are labeled two-faced and can be sent to a labor camp. I thought we said we aren't doing jokes. Okay. Anyways, Arabic terms and sayings are banned. Private religious activity is seen as religious extremism. They seize religious property. They've banned abnormal beards, and many religious names are also banned. One woman was sent to prison for encouraging the use of hijabs. Labeling many products as halal is banned, and some have been forced to do things that go against their religion, such as drinking alcohol. Imams not approved by the government can and often are arrested. There is a blanket prohibition of many items that would wind many Uyghurs in prisons for simple expression of religion or just opinion. Grave sites have been fucking destroyed and turned into, I shit you not, cheesy theme parks with fake pandas and fake pools. When little Timmy goes digging in the sandpit, instead of finding an old shoe or trowel, he's gonna find the desecrated remains of an old Uyghur woman from the 1960s. That's not even a joke. Bones are literally left behind. Mosques are targeted and destroyed. 16,000, in fact, have been either damaged or destroyed between 2017 and 2021. Simultaneously, Chinese culture is replacing Uyghur culture, and out of the prisons, learning any Chinese is mandatory. In and out of the prisons, learning Chinese is mandatory and the only language allowed. As stated at some point previously, I can't remember where, patriotic acts for the CCP are mandatory, including flag raising ceremonies and national anthem reading. Okay, looks like they cut our budget. Probably the Oklahoma joke. Do we even have a budget? Who'd give me money? Okay, well anyways, back to ethnic cleansing. China is forcing the assimilation of Uyghur culture into Chinese culture. Many are often forced to watch propaganda, and many women feel pressured to marry Han Chinese men. It doesn't help that a large percentage of the Uyghur male population is currently in prison. They are cut off from communicating to Muslims and others outside of China. They are displaced from their community and sent to different locations after prison. This is all barely scraping the surface of the crimes being committed against Uyghurs. In fact, I'm not kidding. The day that I wrote this part of the script, a ton of documents were released. I mean, over 300,000 personal records, over 23,000 inmate records, along with photos, videos, and details from inside these camps, including a 14-year-old girl and shoot-to-kill orders for anyone who tries to escape. It is so much that it would take me days just to read it, let alone writing a script and editing it. I'm sorry, but this project did have a due date. Did I follow it? No, sorry, Mom. But I'd like to turn this video in before August. So if you'd like to read those documents, I'm going to put a link to them in the description. I highly encourage you to check it out on your own time. I looked into it to some extent, and I highly recommend it. As I always say, the more you know, the better. Though ignorance is bliss, it doesn't really get the world anywhere. So now that we've discussed what is happening in Xinjiang, I want to talk about how the rest of the world has responded. China has responded in a way that surprises nobody and denied it. In fact, some Chinese state media outlets has named Xinjiang the most successful human rights story. They tried to cover up the crimes that were taking place by preventing journalists from entering and just flat out denying it. And then when stuff began to leak, because of course stuff had to leak, they're locking up millions of innocent people. They tried to downplay the situation. They said things like it's the best thing for them and they can always leave and see their families, which, I mean, I guess is true. They can go see their families at any time. It's just that with the shoot-to-kill policy, they'd just be seeing their family in a casket. They've even released, I shit you not, a La La Land-inspired film starring a Uyghur, a Kazakh, and a Han going around Xinjiang as a musical group. Many groups have rightfully criticized this movie since it shows nothing about surveillance, re-education camps, genocide, all that fun stuff. But I honestly think it is a really accurate depiction because just like Uyghurs in Xinjiang, these actors had cameras constantly filming everything that they did. But now there's no hiding what's going on. Everybody knows. So in their new approach, they say that these people are terrorists, and this is an effort to stop religious extremism and terrorism. And as one journalist put it, they have a kind of hubris around this. There's a level of confidence in having escaped a lot of criticism from the international community, a sense that nobody is actually going to punish us for this. Now, they have replied to many statements made by nations accusing them of genocide by pulling a whataboutism card and discussing the problem of that nation. For example, they asked the UN to investigate the United States gun control laws because, quote, the United States system is equally incapable or lacks interest, motivation, and courage to address these problems thoroughly, and that the U.S. domestic issues have intensified its external aggression. Now, they got a point, but this is coming from a country that is literally committing ethnic cleansings. They don't actually care that kids are being shot. They just want to divert the attention of what's going on in their own nation. China first had the policy of Uyghurs. What even are Uyghurs? Then to they're fine, and then to they fucking deserve what's coming to them. So yeah, but now how has the rest of the world responded? Well, many nations have condemned these actions, including the U.S., UK, and Canada, which have all declared it rightfully a genocide. There have been some unified attempts to combat it, but was met with equal opposition from Chinese allies. It's also very difficult to sanction China for these crimes because of how interlocked these economies are. For example, U.S. economies pay more for tariffs than Chinese companies if the U.S., for example, placed tariffs on China. And often sanctions on Chinese companies come back and harm U.S. companies with supplies and just general labor. This isn't to say that nations haven't put sanctions on China. They have. In fact, the U.S. put even more sanctions on them this December, like December 16th or something like that. But China won't stop. With the U.S. putting on some sanctions. And that's the tricky thing. I've explained what's going on. I've told you the crimes that are being committed and the bad conditions. When it comes to actual solutions, I'm honestly not too certain. I mean, if you're General MacArthur, you might suggest just nuking them, but I think, I don't know, but I think none of you are General MacArthur. So, what can we do? Well, governments can keep doing sanctions, filing complaints, and conducting investigations, but these will only really work if done in unison with other countries. But at the moment, I don't really know if that'll work. I'm not saying it won't work, but I just don't really know. At the very least, it will not work fast, as countries have already done a lot of these, and there's not been a lot of success. Countries can and should make it easier for immigrants from Xinjiang, well, really immigrants from anywhere, but that's for another video, to easily enter and thrive in that country. As for us, though, you and I, however, on an individual level, our possibilities to help are fairly limited. In the U.S., we have a lot of things to worry about, like that, or that, or just just throw up a map of a bunch of like dots and a really like depressing statistic at the bottom. We're dealing with that too. And we can't wave a finger at Xi Jinping and say stop that. I mean, we can, but the only thing that would really change is our inclusion on the census. So, yeah, but there are still things that we can do. I've put multiple charities in the description that you can donate to, that I encourage you to donate to if you get the chance. They all go to support Uyghurs, both in China and outside of China. I'd also recommend voting for political leaders who will advocate for Uyghur rights and who will do things that I stated previously. I encourage their countries to do those things. But most of what I think that we can do is just spread the word. The more people that know what's going on, the better. Though our individual actions may not have that large of an impact, we should still do all that we can. I'm going to leave with a quote. A quote that sits in my kitchen next to a photograph of me downing a glass of sparkling apple cider. A quote that has really stuck with me. It reads, "Nothing I will do will change the world, but that does not release me from the obligation to try." And with that, that's basically all I got for you. If you made it this far, I'm utterly surprised. Great job, honestly. And thank you so much for watching. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to go drink my sorrows away because I read dozens of articles about genocide and go to sleep. And I'd recommend you to do the same. Not the first part, though. Please drink responsibly. Goodbye. A pedophile from the 1970s. It's so ignore that.